Today's shiur begins at the Mishnah at the top of Daf Nun Daled, which also represents the beginning of the 7th parak of Nedarim. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, Davar deboy shliach limluchi bei. We'll see how this figures in our discussion as we go into the text, but it has to do with something that you had ordered to be acquired for you on your behalf by an agent, and the agent, upon reaching the destination where the item was available, didn't find what you requested, and comes and asks you about another item. What we'll be evaluating in the course of the Gemara is the fact that the shliach, that this agent comes to ask you about an alternative item. Can it be said then that the alternative item is a subcategory of what the original item that had been requested? That sounds a little abstract. We'll hopefully make sense of it as we go into the Gemara. So the Mishnah says, Hanoder min hayerek muter b'diluin. One who swore not to eat yerek. Yerek can be explained as vegetables. He is allowed to consume diluim. Diluim is some other type of growth. We've mentioned many times in our Gemara markings, shiurim, that we hesitate translating plants and animals when it comes to those that we don't have a very strong tradition on. So even if from time to time we do throw in a translation, we're not necessarily standing behind it. There are works that do translate, and if one wants to rely on those, then that's fine. So here we have someone who swore not to benefit from yerek. He's allowed to eat diluin. Rabbi Akiva Ozer. Amru lo Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis who said that diluin are not included in yerek, even though diluin are also a type of vegetative growth, the Rabbanan said to Rabbi Akiva, Valo Omer Odom Lishlucho Kachli Yerek. Person will ask of an agent to go and purchase from the store some yerek. Vehu, and the agent, Omer Lo Matzasi Ela Diluim. He might come back from the mission and say, well, I didn't find any yerek. All I found were diluim. So from the fact that the agent makes this distinction, it indicates that diluim are not yerek. Amar lahem, Rabbi Akiva says, Kain hadavar. In fact, your proof of distinction of diluim not being considered part of yerek is actually just the opposite. O Shema Omer Lo, O Shema Omer Hu Lo. Would you think that a person sent to buy yerek would come back upon not finding yerek and say, Lo Motzasi Ella, kitnis? Kitnis is some other kind of vegetation, but is clearly not something that you would consider yerek. So an agent wouldn't come back and ask you, would you be interested in kitnis? Because that's so far removed from the category of yerek. So why did the agent come and say, well, I didn't find any yerek, but I found diluin. Elo shehadiluin bichlal yerek. This is Rabbi Akiva's point, that diluim are a subcategory of yerek. And therefore, if you vowed not to eat from yerek, you cannot partake of diluim. The kitnis ain't no bichlal yerek. However, kitnis is not a subcategory of yerek. It's a different type of vegetation altogether. The Oser beful hamitzri lach umuter biyovesh. One who vowed not to consume yerek is prohibited from eating fresh pul hamitzri, another kind of vegetation. The fresh variety is considered yerek. Umuter biyovesh, however, once that pul hamitzri is dried out, it's no longer considered yerek. And therefore, if you vowed not to eat yerek, you'd be allowed to eat the dry version of the pul hamitzri. We've mentioned already many times in our study of Maseches Nedarim that the main factor in Nedarim is understanding how people think. How do people use their turn of phrase? So that even though on a botanical level, some things that we're considering non-yerek might in fact be yerek, nevertheless, in Nedarim, biology and science are not the let's say the standard by which we judge what is considered part of what. The Gemara, Hanoder min hayerek, and we saw that Rabbi Kiva prohibited a person who vowed not to yerek, prohibited him from eating diluin. The Gemara asks, V'ha min yerek nodar, why does Rabbi Kiva forbid diluin when the person specifically said, I vow not to eat yerek? Diluin are not called yerek. Omar Ula. And here we have diamonds that are explained on the side under our Nosei Mivne heading that you can see in your marked Gemara. It says, Be'ezen nusach neder osar Rabbi Akiva diluin bichlal yerek. What text or what version did the vower say? What exactly did he say that causes Rabbi Akiva to have diluin included in yerek? So Ula says, B'oimer yarke kedera olai. So if he said an expression like that, that's an inclusive expression that will include diluin that as something that is cooked in a pot. The Gemara asks, even so, if you say yarke kedera olai v'dilmo yerek hane'echal b'kedera komar, maybe the intention of such a vow would be to refer to things like garlic, vegetation that is eaten primarily or only when it's cooked. You can see Rashi elaborates on this on the upper part of the narrow lines. V'dilmo hai dekomar yarke gdera alai yarek hanechal b'gdera alai komar kagon shumim u'b'tzolim, things like garlic and onions shehein ne'echolim b'gdera shenosim osam b'gdera k'dei litein tam b'tavshil. Those are types of vegetation that are used for their taste in cooking. So that by saying yarke kedera olai, how is that going to include diluin? The Gemara answers, Omer, the upgraded version of the vow is yerek hamisbashel bekedera olai. If a person says a yerek that is eaten only after it's cooked in a pot, that will include, as far as Rabbi Akiva is concerned, diluin. They are also things that are cooked in a pot. If we look in the Rashi, B'omer yerek hamizbashim gdera diluin nami hein mizbashim gdera v'noisim oisam b'shvil tavshil. They're put in pots to be cooked and eaten. Avol shumin ein nosim osam elo b'shvil ta'am. As opposed to garlic, they're not placed in the pot in order to eat the garlic. They're put in the pot and cooked only for their taste. Ulahachi Rabbi Akiva Ozer, and because he phrased the vow in this way, Rabbi Akiva feels that diluin are included. B'mai komifgli, what's the underlying point of machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan? After all, the Rabbanan, hearing the same vow, will tell you that will not include diluin. The Gemara answers, Rabbanan Savri, Kol milsa detzorech shlicha lemluchi Allah, anything that an agent would have to consult, would have to ask about from the original sender, lav minehu. It's then not part of the original item. It's not a subcategory. It is then something different. Because if it was a subcategory, the agent wouldn't have to come and ask about it. Rabbi Akiva Sovar, Kol milsa demimlich shlichala minehu. He says, if any item that the agent sent out to get something, and upon not finding the original item, comes and asks about this alternative item, that shows us that it is part of or a subcategory of the original item. Omar Abaye, Moide Rabbi Akiva, Li'inyan Malkus She'enoi Loike. Rabbi Akiva will concede, though, that if someone, let us say, vowed not to eat yerek, and he then goes and eats diluin, and even though Rabbi Akiva up till now gave us the impression that diluin are part of yerek, he doesn't go so far as to say that the person will be subject to a court ordained physical punishment for violation of the vow. So that if someone had vowed not to eat yerek and then goes and eats diluin, he won't be subject to lashing. Tanan Hossam. A Tanaic source is presented. The background for the source has to do with an aveira, a sin called me'ila. Me'ila is the personal use or improper personal use of an item that had been dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash, something that you sanctified, and you then subsequently used it for your own purposes. That would be called me'ila. With that in mind, the source says as follows: Hashliach she'osa shlichuso, an agent that was sent to fulfill a desire of the owner, original owner, and in doing the shlichus, in doing that, the item that was, let's say, used or procured was done through a me'ila violation. In other words, the shliach fulfilled the will of the owner, and in fulfilling his will, he let us say he spent sanctified monies. So Baal Habayas Mo'al, the original owner, is in violation. In other words, the action of the agent which fulfilled the will of the original owner results in the original owner being in violation of Me'ilah. Lo asa shlichuso, if the agent did not fulfill the original will of the owner, if, let us say, a person took some money that had been sanctified, gave it to an agent to buy for him a shirt, and the agent came back with a watermelon, so the agent didn't do what the original owner expected. So the expenditure of the funds, of those sanctified funds, for the purpose of a mundane item, will not constitute me'ilah for the original owner, because the agent didn't do the original owner's request, and therefore shliach mo'al. The Gemara asks, Man Tana, who would the author of this source be? In order to answer that, you'll notice we have a triangle marking on the side of the Gemara. We have a nosei mivneh heading. These are nisyonos levarer, attempts to clarify a Mishnah b'Masech Zmila have aliba de Rabbi Akiva. Is it possible that this source is in accordance with Rabbi Akiva? So the Gemara continues and says, Omar Rav Chisda, and by the way, note that we have a long point here. Masnisin de lo Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah we just read is not in accordance with Rabbi Akiva. And how does Rav Chisda know that? Disnan, Ketzad. Here we have an elaboration, a continuation of the source we just read. What is an example of the shliach yes or not, yes or no, fulfilling the ratzon, the desire of the original owner? Omar lo, a balabayas, a homeowner, says, Tain bosalorchem. He asks an agent, we'll call him the waiter in this case, to give bosar to the guests. V'nosan lohem koved. And here, once again, we're getting into translation problems. We're in the realm of vows and things that might, again, biologically or physiologically be considered one and the same. When it comes to the way people speak, they are not necessarily one in the same. In fact, we'll see there's a Mishnah later the person who vows not to eat basar often translated as meat, so that will not necessarily include other items that you might call meat. Details of that will be forthcoming. Here we have an example. An owner, a host, says to a waiter, serve the guests basar. And the waiter gave them koved. Koved is translated often as liver. Tein koved, v'noslam basar. The owner says, give them koved, and the waiter gave them basar. Hashliach moal. The waiter, in this case, is guilty of me'ilah. We didn't say beforehand, but maybe we were just assuming the obvious, that you're dealing here with items that have been sanctified. And the host in the first case said, give this meat to the guests. Now, the meat was meat that had been sanctified. It shouldn't be given to guests. But the waiter didn't do that. The waiter gave them not the basar, but he gave them koved. So, strictly speaking, he didn't do what the original owner said. Therefore, who's guilty of me'ilah? The shliach. In both cases, the basar and the koved had been sanctified, and they were being served to guests, which is the misuse of the sanctified meats. But now the Gemara goes on and says, V'i Rabbi Akiva, if this Tanaic source was in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, Ha'omar Rabbi Akiva, but didn't Rabbi Akiva say, Kol milsa de mimlich alo shliach minehu? Anything that an agent would ask about, let us say, you ask someone to go buy for you some basar. Guy goes to the agent goes to the store and sees that the freezer section holding basar doesn't have any basar in it, but he sees that there is koved nearby. Wouldn't you expect the agent to go ask, listen, go back to the owner and say, you asked me to buy you some basar. I didn't find any basar, but I did find koved. That's what's called kol milsa de mimlich alo shliach. And according to Rabbi Akiva, things like that, minehu, are considered a subcategory of the original item. And therefore, if the homeowner, if the balabayis said to the waiter, serve them basar, and the waiter then served them koved being something that if asked to buy basar and not finding it, you would ask, would you like me to get you some koved? Therefore, the koved is a subcategory of the basar. Limoil balabayis v'lo limol shaliach. The balabayis should have been the one guilty of me'ilah if the source were in accordance with Rabbi Akiva. But the source said that the shlich is moal when the koved was given and not the basar. That shows us that this source, as far as Rav Chisda is concerned, cannot be in accordance with Rabbi Akiva. Omar Abaye disagrees. He says, Afilu Teimo Rabbi Akiva. This source could in fact concur with Rabbi Akiva's approach. And you'll ask then, why is the shliach moal? Why is the waiter moal? Why is he moel? Why is he considered the violator? So Gemara continues at the top of Omid Beis. Milo moder Rabbi Akiva de tzorchen luchi. Wouldn't Rabbi Akiva himself, though, agree that in order to establish whether something is a subcategory of something else, the agent would actually, not just potentially, but actually have had to consult. And did the waiter in our case consult the owner of the meat and the koved here? The sanctified meat and koved? He didn't consult. He acted on his own. If he acted on his own without having consulted, so even Rabbi Akiva concedes that the koved would not be considered, as far as me'ilah purposes concerned, the serving of the koved would not be considered a fulfillment of the original owner's will. So the waiter wasn't doing the will of the original owner. Therefore, it's an action viewed as his own, as the waiter's own action, and therefore the shliach, the waiter, is moyel. Itmar shmaitza kamei de Rava. Abaye's explanation was said in the presence of Rava, that the Mishnah in Me'ilah could well be according to Rabbi Akiva as well. And Omar Lahon, Rava, upon hearing Abaye's explanation, said, Shapir Omar Nachmeni. Nachmeni is a name that is used for Abaye as well. So that we'll call it a nickname. And Rava is saying that, yes, Abaye is saying a very good point of analysis. Man Tana de Polig Olei de Rabbi Akiva. Who is the Tana by name who disagrees with Rabbi Akiva? Answer: Rabbon Shimon ben Gamliel he Desanya. And here we'll have a Tanaic source in which Rabbon Shimon ben Gamliel will appear, and we will try to take note how Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion differs from Rabbi Akiva. Desanya hanoidim min basar, one who vowed not to eat basar. Asur b'chol mine basar. He is prohibited in eating all kinds of basar, whether it's from domesticated animals or undomesticated kosher variety animals. V'asur b'rosh u'baraglayim u'b'kona v'koved u'b'leiv u'ba'oifos. By having vowed not to eat basar, your vow will include the head, the legs, the trachea, the liver, the heart, and fowl. Just again, notice that it's very difficult to translate these expressions, because if a person vowed not to eat meat, it would be obvious that includes the head meat of the animal. It's also meat, isn't it? So again, you can see that the term basar has a very specific connotation in people's minds, and there are things that will be included even though it's not we'll say a simple translation of the word in people's minds. Nevertheless, it's a category, so that by saying that you don't want to eat basar, it will include all the items we just mentioned. There are things that are not included. Umuter, basar dogim v'chagovim, one will be able to eat fish. Basar dogim is a compound expression, but it means fish. He's allowed to eat fish and locusts. There are kosher variety locusts, they're called chagovim, and he's allowed to eat from them. Because the vow not to eat basar doesn't include those. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer hanodir min basar aser b'chol mine basar. In that sense, that's the same as what the Tanakama said. However, note umuter b'rosh u'baraglayim u'b'konu b'koved u'b'leiv u'b'oifos. He is allowed to eat these things. And we'll now explain, even though if an agent had been asked to purchase basar and there was no basar in the supermarket freezers, but there was rosh, raglayan, konavim, koved, leiv, ophos, he would ask, would you like me to buy you one of these things? So it's a milsa de mimla kole shaliach. Nevertheless, Reb Shmuel says, the vow was concerning basar. It doesn't include these things. Even though, I know we're sounding a little repetitive, even though these things are something that an agent would have consulted. So you can see that he disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. And that's why we brought in this source. We brought this in as a response to the question, who is the Tana that disagrees with Rabbi Akiva? Now, Rav Shimon goes on to say that if a person vowed not to eat basar, and I'm telling you you're allowed, you would be allowed to eat things like the liver, heart, chicken. Well, the ain't sarach lomar basar dogim v'gam. Then it goes without saying that you would be allowed to eat fish and locusts. V'chein hoy Rav Shmuel omer krevayim lav basar. v'oichleim lav bar inish. Rav Moshe Muller has a saying that goes along with his opinion. Then the Rashi calls this a shmaitza achriti. It's a separate point, and it goes as follows: that krevayim are innards, like organ meat of animals. Innards are not bosar, and he who eats it is not a man. The Gemara asks, what do you mean that one who eats it's not a man? With regard to what do you mean? The Gemara answers, Ochlehen kebosar le'inyan zvini lav bar inish. That means anyone who would be willing to pay for the organ meat that we refer to, the same price that he would pay for meat being more expensive. So anyone who would be willing to pay a lot of money for the krevayim, for the innards, the same amount that you would pay for regular cuts of meat, he is not a man. In other words, there's something wrong with him. The Rashi phrases this. You can see we've dashed underline a couple lines of Rashi, a few lines down from here. Anyone who spends the same amount on innards an amount that he could have purchased bosser and nevertheless buys krevayim, lav bar inishu the botla daita etzel bnei adam. He's not. In common terms, we'd say he's not normal. His behavior is, even though maybe he values organ meat, but such thinking, such behavior is considered void relative to the majority of the population. The Gemara continues now with a question. Notice it's a long question. My shna besar oif l'tanakama. The Osir. The Ovid Shlicha de Mimlachale, the Tanakama said that a person who vowed not to eat basar would not be allowed to eat fowl either. If you want a more simple example, we'll just use the example of chicken. So why is that the case? Because if the agent would find no basar, he would come back and ask, would you like me to get you chicken? Besar dolkim nami ovid shlicha di lo mashkach basar bisra mimlech alei. In the case of fish, the same thing. If you send someone to buy you some basar, found no basar, but there was fish available, he would ask you, would you like me to buy you some fish? Diomar ilo mashkachna bisra, I see dogim. If I don't find any meat, should I bring you some fish? The litzeru, and as a result of that, according to the Tanakama, according to the first opinion, fish should be prohibited. And yet, in the Tanakama's presentation, he said on the third line of that Tanaic source that it's muter bebasar dogim. Omar Abaye. So we have to explain the opinion of the Tanakama. Why is he making a distinction concerning one who vowed not to eat meat, that chicken would be prohibited and fish would be allowed? Why is that? So we have approaches. You can see Abaye number 1 here, and then later there's another triangle, and the name we would read there is Rav Papa. So Omar Abaye, Kegoin Shehiki's Dam, Dolo Ochil Dokim. We're talking in our Mishnah, or in the Tanakama, in the Tanaic source in which he appeared, the person who vowed not to eat meat was a person that at the time he was making the vow, he had just experienced a medical procedure called bloodletting. People who undergo bloodletting do not entertain the thought of eating fish. Fish consumption is injurious for people that went through bloodletting. So when a person vows, he vows not to eat something that without the vow he would eat. In this case, since the person vowing is someone that just bloodlet, he wouldn't have eaten fish anyway. The Gemara asks, well, if you're talking about someone that just bloodlet, afilu oifos nami lo ochil. He wouldn't eat chicken either. So why does the chicken become usher in this vow? And how do we know that he wouldn't eat fowl either? Yomar Shmuel, the mesukar means someone who bloodlet. The ochil bisra de tzifra, and he after bloodletting goes and eats fowl flesh, eats chicken. Porach libe ketzifra, his heart will start to palpitate like that of a bird. V'tanya ein mekizim lo al dogim v'lo al oifos. We don't bloodlet for someone who ate fish, who ate fowl, v'lo al basar maliach, nor for someone who ate salted meat. V'tanya heikiz dam, someone who bloodlet, lo yoichal, lo chola, v'lo gvina, v'lo beitzim, v'lo shachlayim, v'lo oifos, v'lo basar maliach. One who bloodlet should not eat milk, cheese, eggs, shachlayim, type of vegetation, nor should he eat fowl and not salted meat. Well, you see very clearly from over here that if you're going to say that the Tanaic source in which the Tanakhama said one was Nodir min Abosar, someone that bloodlet, no distinction should be made between fish and fowl, and yet he does make a distinction. The Gemara answers, Shaini oifos, the Efshal Yadei Shlika. Fowl is different than fish. When it comes to fish, there's no way, however you prepare the fish, that the person who bloodlet would come to eat fish. Any form of fish preparation, whether it's sushi, or it's pickled, or it's roasted, whatever, people who bloodlet will not eat fish. When it comes to fowl, however, someone who bloodlet and then is sholek. Sholek is a form of cooking, a certain level of cooking that known as shlika. Some Rishonim say shlika is overcooking, extensive cooking. The bird or the fowl meat is something that even someone who bloodlet would eat. So when he vowed not to eat basar, and as we explained before, he was vowing not to eat something that without the vow he would eat. Even though he bloodlet, he could come to eat ofos if it's ofos that went through shlika. So the vow will cover that. We want to emphasize that even though you're dealing with something that a shliach would consult over, and in accordance with the opinion of the Tanakhama, which seems to be like that of Rabbi Akiva, a distinction, as we just said, is made because of these very specific circumstances. Rav Papa explains the Tanakhama, Kagoin de Kaivin le Einei. We're talking about someone that has an eye problem. Literally, his eye hurts him. An eye infection at the time that he is making the vow. The dogim koshim leinayim. Fish consumption is not good for people whose eyes hurt them. Yochi, ochil dogim. What are you talking about? If his eyes hurt him, he will eat fish. Tomar Shmuel. Shmuel has a drosha on the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. In succession, you have the letter Nun, Samachayin. And what does that represent? Nuna is fish. Samo is a medicine. Le'ayinayim, for the eyes. So, a person whose eyes hurt him will eat fish. So why is it then that the vow not to eat basar wouldn't include as prohibited the fish? The Gemara says, mention was made that fish is therapeutic for eye aches. Hahu soif uchla. That is true when the person is at the end of when we'll say the infection is starting to disappear. Sof uchla means the end of the ailment. So when a person's reached the end of his ailment, so then the fish is positive. However, in our case, the source above dealt with someone that at the time of the neder, at the time of vow, he's at the beginning of his eye infection. And someone like that wouldn't think of eating fish. Therefore, the neder, the vow, does not include fish as a prohibition. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.